we sorted this out, and we're glad that you're all here now. So now, especially we're 15 minutes over time, so we'll just jump straight into it, into the presentations by our sponsors. So we'll start off with Crom from Canrium, and he will give us some insights from Canrium's perspective on the climate finance situation at the moment.
Thank you very much. So, yeah, my name is Krum. I work for Kendrium. We are mid-size asset manager with about 150 billion euros under management. And more than half this is in sustainable funds. So in particular, I work on assessing how sustainable countries are. So I look at everything that can be considered sustainability within a country. I look at emissions, I look at deforestation, I look at environmental protection, water pressures, air pollution, sustainable agriculture, food security, energy transition. But we also have other products more on the equity side where there's a climate action fund that invests in companies that are offering either energy transition solutions or climate-friendly solutions. So it's a very broad field, and it has been really accelerating in the last few years. I think that more and more investment vehicles are going to be starting just to invest in new technologies and new solutions. What I see, especially pertinent for Europe, I think water pressures, biodiversity, soil erosion, and sustainable agriculture are going to be really problematic. But not only in Europe, this is also true for Asia. A lot of African countries are having significant problems importing food for the population. There is a lot of deforestation going on. But in particular for Europe, especially Southern Europe, there is a group of countries such as Malta, Greece, Spain, Portugal, Italy is experiencing it as well, but also countries that you might not necessarily think of, such as Belgium and Netherlands. I think that agriculture has been relying on underground water sources for a long time, especially for irrigation. And this conflict exists around the world, really. So I think more sustainable ways to do agriculture, to preserve biodiversity, to stop soil erosion, and also solutions that ensure sustainable access to clean water and sanitation need to be dramatically scaled up given the pressures that we're going to face in the next 5 to 10 years. So in a nutshell, that's what I've been looking at recently, and with a broad brush, this is what we're looking at in general.
Thank you so much, Crom. So before I open it up to the audience, I had a quick question as well. So I was curious that you were also involved with the competition last year. And so if you would be able to share some insights into the applications you saw last year, what they did well, what they could have improved on, and anything that you would like to share with the applicants who've joined this webinar in terms of how they should be approaching. We have the concept no deadline in a week, so I'm sure your insights based on last year's competition would be really useful for them.
Yeah, what I saw last year, I mean, I just saw the finalists. There didn't seem to be some of the ideas were not really thought out. There were teams that just had like 1 or 2 slides in terms of a broad concept, and these ideas kind of I would think of them as half-baked. They were not successful. I think what would be key for me to see, and it's going to be very important because we are also reviewing our participation in a variety of programs and sponsorships that we have. What I would like to see, it doesn't necessarily need to be something extremely complex, but to be actually doable. And what I would like to see also is a clear plan by the team to actually pursue what they're going to suggest. Because obviously, um, if if somebody wins a prize and that's it, and nobody and they don't choose to keep going with it, then okay, you won a prize, you put it on your CV. That's not the point of this competition, at least how I see it. There was one or two teams, I think, that um, were actively pushing with their ideas, and it was also good to see that I remember for one of the teams, I would think of this competition as one of the 10 things that this idea is trying to apply for, right? Because there's obviously there's a cash, there's monetary prizes here, but then there is also mentorship that's offered for successful teams. At least this is how it was last year, and also there were teams that joined startup accelerators and hubs and so on. And so I would like to see this competition being one of the portfolio of financing options that an idea has under its belt. And again, you don't need to reinvent the wheel here. I think this is what I said in the competition last year when the finalists were being judged. I think it might sound more appealing to present something revolutionary, but what I see as a problem is that there are really simple things, and we know that we're supposed to do them, but they're not being done. So even having a concept as to how to organize and do a thing that's not new, but just organize it better, or connect people, connect organizations from different industries, even that would be much more valuable because it's something that's already tested, and we know about this. I mean, I'll just give you one example without going into too much detail. There is a lot of thought being put into of these factories that they're gonna suck carbon dioxide out of the air and then they're gonna store it underground and so on. Obviously, that's beyond the scope of this competition. But we already have such machines. They're called trees. They're called algae. So aquaculture and reforestation, these technologies have been around for millions of years. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. So when we talk about something like $1,000 per ton of carbon dioxide sequestered in one of these new machines and factories, for $1,000 you can plant like 300-400 trees that they're gonna sequester this ton of carbon dioxide a lot easier. But it's a lot punchier to say, oh, I have this like new factory and new machine, and I can get private equity capital. It feels like a lot of these things we're valuing once there is a monetary value attached to it. And now there is monetary value attached to carbon credits. There's gonna be monetary value attached to biodiversity and so on. So yeah, I want to see something that it's even that this is like an old Silicon Valley type thing, that the startup accelerators are not necessarily sponsoring people or taking people in based on the idea, but based on the team. if the team is strong, if the team is determined, ideas can change down the line and they can be adapted to the current circumstances. But it's very hard to find people that are going to stick together and they're going to push it.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your perspective on that. So I'll open it up to audience questions now. So you can either unmute yourself or you can type it in the chat. So we'll give it a couple of minutes to see questions pop up.
Good evening, sir.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yes, sir. So first of all, good evening, sir, and thank you for giving us an opportunity for basically integrating innovation with sustainability. So myself, Arpit Gupta from GLA University, India, and my question is, so like we have to present basically what will be the different sources of finance, what are the financing options, or is like the financing is already there and we have to present the impact, like the impact in terms of economic or the triple bottom line. So this was a slight confusion that I wanted to like clarify. Thank you, sir.
That's probably more pertinent for the organizers of the competition. But like what we saw last year were both innovative financing vehicles for certain things, or just ideas as to how I mean I think you guys have
Yes.
access to maybe like the winning presentations from last year. I don't necessarily see that. I'm not expecting that you guys are going to be able to like figure out like a innovative like financing vehicle or a hedge fund or whatever. But at least from my perspective, okay, this is a climate related solution. This is the impact that it could have. It could be a micro impact, it could be a macro impact, it could be localized, it could be on a city, on a state or whatever. This is why this is important. This is why it's not being done. This is how we can go around it. And this is where we can find the missing bits, whether it's going to be financing, whether it's going to be organization, whatever it's going to be, to find the solution to an existing problem. At least that, I mean, you guys that are putting the competition together, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is, it doesn't necessarily need to be a like a new type of financing vehicle or whatever. I mean, once you have a successful idea, the financing is going to come.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Arpit, if you also need some more insights into this, if there's any clarification specifically on the concept note itself, you can always email us, but broadly aligned with what Chrome has said.
Okay, sir. Sure. Definitely.
Are there any other questions for Chrome?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on this. There was a team presenting from India last year. The connection was really bad, and I personally was not able to understand anything that they said. So I think a top tip, apart from like putting together a good idea and good solution, please make sure that the connection is good, tested maybe with the organizers before you feel selected to present at the final. But that was it. Their idea might have been fantastic, but I just didn't get it. I just couldn't understand, and the presentation is kind of like half of.
No, sir. So we'll definitely work hard and we'll definitely present it
Very
like
true.
to your satisfaction.
Okay, we're gonna take one more question before we move on to the next sponsor. So Anshul, go ahead.
Good evening, sir. I am Anshul Agrawal from GLA University, India. So I was asking that what are the exact expectation of you, and what are the difference can we make? What you need basically need from that when we are focusing over the climate financing, then what are the differences should be made? I want to know the expectation from you.
The
So I
expectation from what I would like to see is a description of a problem, description of a solution, and why is it not being solved? And then, okay, if you do this, you're going to solve it, and this is how we propose to do it. That's it. There is a problem. This is why this is a problem. This is why it's not being addressed. This is what we're going to do in order to solve it. And this is what the impact is going to be on my community, on the city, on the state, or whatever it is. So it's like these are the pieces. Problem, why it's not being addressed, what's the impact, this is how we're going to address it, and this is what we propose to do. And it has to be doable by you guys.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure. Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you so much, Chrome. That framing of problem, solution, and impact, I'm sure lots of applicants are finding that super useful. So thank you again for your time, and apologies again for the delay. We'll be moving on to the next sponsor now. So that is the Center for Greening Finance and Investment. It's a consortium of universities based here in the UK, and I'll let them introduce themselves, but we have Janak and Ricky from the CGFI to tell us about their work.
Great, welcome everyone. This is Janak, and then I'm waiting for my colleague Ricky to have a short presentation, which we will circulate as well, so everyone has it with links and all that. So wanted to briefly introduce me. So I'm Janak, and I'm the Innovation Design Associate at CGFI. So basically leading in our innovation efforts across the ecosystem and connecting our innovation hubs across Leeds and London for robust climate data and how we could partner up externally with VCs, startups, financial services institutions, corporates to commercialize products, tools, structures. And wanted to briefly note that the Data Analytics Prize is supported from the National Environmental Research Council, or NERC, but it's managed through CGFI. And I'll hand it over to my colleague, Ricky, to briefly introduce herself as well.
Hi, everyone. This is Ricky. I hope you can hear me well. Yes, I'm a colleague of Janak. And actually, because the London Innovation Hub is a partnership between CGFI and also Imperial. So you can see my backdrop is Imperial. So I'm working on, I'm representing the London Innovation Hub, and I'm also from Imperial. Now, Janak, would you like us to just share our screen and show our, yeah, let me do that now. Okay, is it sharing okay?
Thanks, Ricky.
Yeah. So, yeah. So I think Janet would like to talk about a little bit about the background for us, right?
Yep. So yeah, as I mentioned, we are CGFI, supporting innovation, working with different stakeholders across the UK, but also looking beyond the UK as well. And didn't want to touch too much on CGFI, but wanted to focus on our Data Analytics Prize, looking for creative ways to utilize climate data sets, climate science data sets, robust data sets, and how we can find ways to improve the adoption of these tools, data in climate finance. The next slide, please.
Yeah. Okay, this is the second slide. So at CGFI, we proudly sponsor Data Analytic Prize of the Climate Investment Challenge. This is, of course, organized by our co-host tonight. And let me very briefly introduce the themes for the Data Analytic Prize this year. And let me also emphasize that these three themes are what we encourage participants, applicants to really look into it and to think of the solutions and proposals along these themes, but they are not mandatory. So we would like to share what we think are important for this year in particular, and then Janak will also explain these themes with some illustrative cases. So the first theme is physical climate risk integration. So in the data analytic prize, we look for proposal that can qualify physical risk for companies. Here, the companies may be financial institutions or companies or the financial decision-making process of certain companies. And another thing that relating to physical climate risk integration is how to inform those companies specific adaptation strategies based on climate and environmental scientific data sets. The second theme is climate transition risk integration. Now, I think later on towards the end of this presentation, we'll showcase actually last year the winner theme is very much relating to this climate transition risk. So in this theme, we would like applicants to quantify climate transition risk for companies at the physical asset level or environmental and socioeconomic scientific data sets. The second variation of this theme is to quantify socioeconomic implications at a company or issue level under different transition scenarios. The third theme is innovative financial products. In this theme, we would encourage applicants to design some new financial instruments based on some third-party data sets, including like geospatial data set, a real-time or weather data set, etc., for more transparent risk and impact monitoring, reporting, and verification. Now, in the next few slides, Janet will help us to explain these themes with some real case studies.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Ricky. Was there another slide before that, I think, or was that the only one?
This is Climate X, physical.
Okay. Did we have, okay, cool. So for instance, the first criteria, an example is Climate X, which is a climate risk data provider, giving businesses and governments data needed to build climate resilience, so physical or transition risks, by leveraging, climate risk modeling, state of the art. They also allow the analysis in quantifying the impact of extreme weather events linked to climate change. ClimateX, as a startup, also provides asset level risk ratings, climate adjusted low estimates under multiple climate emission scenarios. Some of their partners include consulting firms like Deloitte, two other like big tech firms like Microsoft. The second one is our very own CGFI's Global Resilience Index, GRI Risk Viewer, working with our partners such as the World Bank and others, compares risks arising from multiple hazards at a global scale. It provides easily viewed risk metrics to understand risks to people, planet, including prosperity. And the components of risks are presented using open public good data sets, so public utility data sets describing hazard, exposure, and vulnerability. Next slide, please. Sweet. So our second example for climate transition risks integration is an organization called Climate Trace. It's named by Time Magazine's as the 100 best innovations in 2020. Their emissions map is the largest global inventory and interactive map of greenhouse gas emission sources. It monitors and publishes GHG emissions within weeks, and it launched in 2021 before COP26, basically improving monitoring, reporting, and verification of both carbon dioxide and methane. The group also monitors sources such as coal mines, power stations via satellite data and AI. And use cases include like decarbonization and also ESG investing as interesting ones. The third example. Yeah. So with innovative financial instruments, this is another example. It's called the Grove. FSL or Forestry Smart Ledger. It combines satellite computer vision and remote sensing of biomass with blockchain verification of sustainable land use impacts and restoration sort of agreements to create performance rewards. One example is the Indian communities engaged in regenerative forestry. The video is added there for your viewing, but it's a really cool tool and unique one and quite innovative, as the name suggests. And so this following slide, I think it's you, Ricky.
Yes, on this slide, we will focus on data analytic price, which is one of the distinct category in the CIC, the Climate Investment Challenge. And this data analytic price is sponsored by CGFI. For all the applications, we look for 3 general criteria. But for data analytic price, we also have some additional criteria to look at. For the 3 general criteria, look at, first of all, implementation feasibility, which I think our previous presenter, Khurram, also mentioned that in short, implementation feasibility means that your proposal should be viable. Viable in the sense that it's able to identify stakeholders, the users, and also to identify the specific data sources. How are you going to get the data? And what is your methodology should be very clear. And what are the challenges that you expect to encounter, and how are you going to overcome those challenges in your implementation? So in short, is your proposal doable? The second general criteria is, of course, this is CIC, this is a Climate Investment Challenge. Of course, we look at that your proposal will have a good impact on climate or relating issues. So it can be on physical side, physical climate risk. It can also be positive impact on the social and or economic impacts. So that can be from carbon footprints to social economic positive impacts. In short, here we look for what kind of change that your proposal is going to lead us to, and how are you going to make this change? The third general criteria is scalability. In short, scalability means how are you going to get your proposal, your model or solutions to the market, and how you can, that means you have to identify your target customers and how you may scale up that to expand the your business proposal. Now, we have also some additional criteria in this specific category of a data analytic price. First of all, of course, again, it is for the CIC, so for the data analytic price, we look for that your data analytic model or solution or proposal must make climate change as part of a financial decision-making process. So of course, it can be very often will help financial institutions or some other companies in their financial decision-making. The second, of course, is to help your customers or stakeholders or target users to change the existing investment decision-making process. The third criteria that we are also looking at is EDI, equity, diversity, and inclusion. In short, we hope that proposals can come from a diversity of applicants of different experiences, backgrounds, and geographies that will make the financial industry stronger together through diversity. And of course, you don't need to think that, am I very much diverse from the mainstream? You don't need to be 100% that are qualified under the EDI. Please feel free to join this competition if you have some solid ideas that will fit into our criteria. Now, before we end this very short presentation, let us end with a story about our first winner last year of the data analytic prize. Last year was the first year that CGSI sponsored this prize, and the winner was Reckon. Those very young ladies, they had a story about them, how they came up with that winning solution is that during the lockdown period, they witnessed through the news, of course, the traumas in India when they suddenly locked down the whole country and the social impact on those poorer workers or informal workers. They had to go back to their home and they lost a lot of income. They suffer a lot during that particular episode. So that inspired these two young ladies to think about how about a just transition. Just transition means that, of course, we would like to comply with the IPCC and the climate change target. But during that transition, that is also associated with risk and cost, and very often socioeconomic costs. For example, the impact on the poorer workers and informal workers. So this inspired the two ladies, reckon, to think of how to combine different kind of socioeconomic data and consideration and climate modeling, put them together so as to help the financial service sectors, for example, banks, to implement their transition planning, to help them to quantify these different kinds of social factors in their decision making. For example, through regulatory stress testing or climate risk modeling in their financial decision process. And they also use the IAMS, integrated assessment models, and to integrate many data from different knowledge partners. And so that was a story about our last year's winning prize reckon. And I think this story I hope that will encourage all the participants tonight that just think of your bold idea, because next Monday will be the deadline for this competition. In the first stage, you only need to submit your concept ideas. So please make your concept ideas as clear as possible according to our criteria, but feel free. I don't think there's anything for anyone to lose in this competition, because apart from winners, all the applicants, you can test out your brilliant ideas through the process and to have interaction with the panelists and also your peers. I think that everyone will gain from this participating in this prize. So feel free to join this competition. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, Ricky. I think that ends our presentation.
Yeah.
Thank you so much both for that presentation. Just to start off with a quick question. So one of the things applicants ask us a lot about with regard to the data analytics prize is how they can get access to different data sets. So are there any resources you can share about open source data sets that people can access, or perhaps you can share the expectations at the concept note stage, but also sort of at the final stage of like how much you want the actual data sets to be utilized in the solutions they're presenting.
Shanna, would you like to share your tips on data sets?
Sorry, I was muted for a bit. With data sets, open source data sets, happy to send sort of a list, because I'm conscious of time as well, to your colleagues at the CIC, and ways to maneuver that as well, like tips with that. So that would be probably the most helpful in terms of that. I'm not sure Ricky or anyone else from CGFI is here, if they had any other points.
Yeah. I think we start with your sources first, and maybe I think that will be through the CIC host, if you want to have any supplementary information about the data sets. Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Janak. That would be super helpful if you can send us that. We'll take one question from the audience. So if anyone has any specific questions related to the data analytics prize, now is the time.
There was, can I jump in? There was one on the chat.
Okay.
Are we expected to have those data analytics in our concept notes? So I think having an idea of, like, because data is quite broad, like as we mentioned, through different use cases and areas you want to look at in terms of the market, region, geography, what types, and we could illustrate that better. Or you'll get the notes as well from the PowerPoint or the PDF as well to help you with that finalizing of the decision and that gap in the market and the problem to the solution eventually. So
there is actually a sample concept note specifically for data analytic on the CIC's website that you can take reference from. And I think you don't need to work out your examples of how to do exactly give an example or doing those data analytic, but I think in your concept notes, at least you need to point out to your data sources and your method. How are you going to use those data? But you don't need to actually run a set of data in your concept notes.
Thanks so much, Ricky, for that. I think we'll go ahead and transition to our next sponsor. Just by way of introduction, I'm the other co-head of Sponsor and Industry Relations. So I just want to go ahead and introduce Victoria Harling, who's the head of Emerging Market Corporate Debt at 91. So she'll be giving a brief overview next. Victoria, if you're there.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? No.
We can hear you, but it's very quiet.
Can you hear me now? Okay, I'm going to talk into the machine. Okay, so I am head of EM Corporate Debt at 91. For those of you who are not aware of who 91 are, we're a global asset manager. We started life in South Africa under the Investec brand, Investec Asset Management. And we peeled away in 2020 to be a standalone asset manager away from the bank. It's a big financial conglomerate. We are the largest fixed income manager in South Africa and indeed in Africa. We are the second largest EM corporate manager, dedicated EM corporate manager in the world. We're the third largest EM local currency sovereign manager in the market. And we run a number of different strategies, including infrastructure funds, particularly in Africa. Our heritage is very much for a just transition and sustainability. And our total assets under management are close to $160 billion, of which nearly 60% is in emerging markets. So I have 25 years of emerging market experience, and that is basically my entire career, focusing on lending money to emerging market companies. And I am lucky enough to invest in over 84 countries. We have 112 people within our emerging market business, and a long pedigree of over 15 years on average experience. What I would say is in terms of the clients that we run money for, they're some of the largest asset owners in the world, including insurers. And I run a lot of money for insurers. Now, one of the things that you might have to think about if you're thinking about financial product and innovation is accounting policies. Now, without getting into too much detail, there are lots of things that insurance can't do, and they're some of the biggest asset owners in the world. They also drive a lot of financial innovation because as your insurance markets grow in emerging markets, they have more money to invest and deploy. So you've got to think about the type of product that they can buy. And you've got to think about that in terms of the length of time that they're prepared to lend for. So clearly, if you're an emerging market and you've got cars and they all need insurance, that's like 3 to 5 years. And then life insurance is obviously much longer product. Now, in terms of what our clients are experiencing, one of the biggest frustrations that we had in emerging markets is that naturally, you've heard about the just transition, but often the cheapest form of energy has been the highly emitting fossil fuels. Take India, for example. And then you have the compounded effect of, mass economy, so 1.2 billion people in India. So you've got to think about how these countries are able to transition in an affordable way. But the problem for global emitters that we were experiencing was that actually they just want to reduce their carbon footprints. So we were given targets from some of our clients to reduce annual emissions, which doesn't solve the problem, because all that forces me to do is to reduce my portfolio from owning oil and gas to owning telecoms or banks that don't have a high carbon footprint. And in fact, all that does is decarbonize my portfolio without actually saving the world and getting to net zero. So we thought long and hard, because if you think about emerging markets and why they're important, given that they're so heavy emitters, that actually clients would be more skewed to move away from emerging markets, when in fact, when you consider 60% of the world emissions are emerging markets and 90% of the growth in emissions is coming from emerging markets, you really have to focus on how you solve the problem in emerging markets. So what we did instead was try and put together a product that is about financing, because you'll hear a lot about private equity, you'll hear a lot about, you know, the ways that you can commercially make money, but most companies are more than 1 times levered, and debt is a cheaper form of financing. So in terms of debt, you want to think about how you can lend money to companies to help them invest and shift the needle. The other thing you have to consider is that that doesn't happen in 1 year. If somebody's going to invest in a factory or a business, it's usually 7 to 10 years before you actually shrink your carbon footprint till that new technology comes on. So you've got this mismatch of how can you lend money on a longer term and help clients reduce their portfolios quickly, and how do you measure it? And we decided the best thing we could do was actually calculate the carbon. If we were going to lend money to a company, what that meant for reducing carbon for a heavy emitter, or for an industry that's actually avoiding carbon, what sort of carbon that comes out of the atmosphere. So think about that. Now, we haven't solved the problem of the fossil fuels, because a lot of our clients simply reputationally cannot be associated with fossil fuels, but yet you want to be able to lend money to companies that are transitioning to a low carbon world. And that means not ignoring fossil fuels. It means actually thinking about how these companies evolve. And you also have to consider that a lot of these companies are huge, so they have money to deploy in R&D. So if anyone can solve the problem, it's not the small guy on the street, it's the guy that's got the money to invest in lots of people to shift the needle. And in November, I was in India, speaking to NTPC, state-owned energy company. They have invested in technology that actually carbon captures up to 95% of the emissions of coal. So as much as, you know, you need to think about reducing fossil fuels, we have to think about, is it better for a system that's already in place that can capture carbon and capture it effectively, in addition to all of the new technologies? Because I don't think there's one solution. And some of the things you should consider is what is cost effective, because if you really want to shift the needle, the single biggest motivation for shifting it is money. Okay, a lot of emerging markets today are actually investing heavily because they can see the commercial viability of it. And I was in Mumbai on Friday speaking at a climate panel, and I was lucky enough to be presented with a lot of the industrialists in India who have invested heavily, like Adani Group have invested very heavily in renewables and circular economy. So also think about, if you're going to set up they've set up a copper smelter, and that copper smelter captures all of the emissions around producing and all the waste, and it takes that waste and it actually converts it into fertilizer, right? And then that in itself creates this circular economy, which reduces emissions even more. It's not creating waste, it's actually using that waste for something else. So think about the compounding effect of some of those industries and the technology that's happening. And then you think about who can make it cheaper. So some of the things that are happening in emerging markets, for example, would be in India, you have an abundance of sun, an abundance of wind. So you actually, if you can produce around the clock energy, can suddenly start to recycle that into really cheap green hydrogen. And who's going to buy it? The Europeans, because they don't have the same dynamic. So think about export markets. If you're thinking about financing, who's going to lend money to these economies to produce cheap product that they can use down the line? So think about some of that. Saudi Arabia is exactly the same. They are desperately trying to transition from an oil economy to a non-oil economy. Think about the growth that that provides. And actually, one of the things that I was talking to on the panel about on Friday, the financiers and the banks were saying, State Bank of India actually said they have green deposits and then they produce green loans. But they said the cost of green loans is more because they have to produce all of the admin around proving where they're investing, and there's extra costs. Coming back to the effects of climate change, my single biggest message to them was don't be short-sighted, because India's growth is premised on the rural economy and getting a lot of microfinance into rural areas. Again, thinking about diversity and inclusion, a lot of those people are women. Okay, so getting women into small businesses. Now you think about what that does for GDP growth. Then you compound that. If you have rural economies that are being flooded, you wipe out that GDP growth. But more importantly, you create non-performing loans on banks' books. What that does is it stops the banks lending, which then causes the economy to slow down. So my single biggest advice to the industrialists was don't be short-sighted, because if you don't act now, you're going to have more floods, you're going to cause long-term slowdown in growth. So when you're thinking about innovative types of product, think about the effects of climate change on top of the effects that people can have when you're factoring in financing. So there's a lot of content there. There's a lot of things to do. I will tell you that people are investing. Okay, so there is hope. There is real technology being deployed. Think about digitalization, what information can do to spread the word. And actually, India have got the best digitalization in the world. Think about how commercially viable the products are. Now, Adani have managed to get green hydrogen, they say, by 2030, down to $1 a kilo. That's commercially viable. So don't be put off today when you hear that some of these technologies are not viable. And think about land use, think about productivity. So of course, planting trees is a wonderful thing to do, but people need land. How can you really shift the needle? Vertical farming, think about all of those, but then think about the consequences for farmers in these poor economies. You know, Italy banned laboratory-based meat on the basis that it would affect its rural economy too much. So you have to think about the politics around it. And then finally, thinking about geopolitics. There's an awful lot being done. So you'll read a lot about China and the US and tariffs. I can tell you that the US have banned imports into China, okay, for solar panels. Where are they sending them? India. Is India using those solar panels for themselves? No, they're sending them to the States because they can make way more money because the US are overpaying for things now because of tariffs. So think about the world, think about all the smart people in the world that are actually making money off geopolitics for all the wrong reasons. And think about how, you know, you can take the natural resources in any economy and maximize it to create the biggest impact. So I'm going to stop there. I could talk forever about this topic.
That was amazing. Thank you so much. Really appreciated hearing your insights. Does anyone have any questions?
I've stunned you all.
Hello.
Oh.
Right. I had one question. I just wanted to understand if scalability and making an idea for emerging and developing markets, are these two at odds, in the sense that when I read on the Climate Investment Challenge website, so it says, can the proposal scale up to other geographies or industries? But in the emerging developing market section, it says address an underserved climate change issue within a specific or emerging developing market. So I just want to understand, if I make an idea that it's specifically addressing a single area but very significant problem, and it's not really applicable, relevant to other areas, would it be really a negative pointer for my concept, for my idea? If that makes sense, if the question makes sense.
I don't mind actually jumping in right here as well, since I'm kind of heading up the committee that will be doing the markings. And just on that note, we do emphasize the scalability in terms of the impact of an idea that's presented. So yeah, that's why we kind of specify we would like to see this being applicable in other markets, because then the impact is that much greater. But we don't want to obviously discourage any ideas. And if you have this particular, niche idea that's in a particular market, obviously, please go ahead and submit.
Makes sense. Thank you.
If you just think about the industries that create emissions, agriculture is a huge one. Okay, so you have to think a little bit about agriculture, maybe efficient growth. We invest in companies that actually invest in technology to get better crop yields. So use of land is important. Thinking about energy, that's a very important sector. Transport, obviously, and then homes. Are people doing enough on green housing? And you think about the population going forward, and how those people need quality housing. So, think about the impact, because if you take a really small, new industry, actually telecoms is an area that's growing, because you imagine all the digitalization, you imagine the data centers that are going to be needed and the efficiency of those data centers. So how are they using renewables? How are they getting their efficiencies down? Do your homework, look at the sectors that are really important. There's obviously a lot of money going into these sectors to solve for the problem, but do that rather than think about, again, one of the things we did was calculate the amount of carbon it would take out, because if you're going to invest a lot of money into a technology, it has to actually shift the needle. So be practical.
Hi, Victoria. I also had a question, very insightful talk you gave. So to your first point about decarbonization and what your clients who are investing with you have certain targets of reducing the carbon of the portfolio, that's a very interesting insight. And I've been recently reading about the carbon border adjustment mechanism of the EU. So what they're saying is, if there is not a carbon tax at the source, then the goods produced in those emerging markets would need to be taxed when they're coming into the EU. And based on what you're telling me, if these clients are telling you, we want the money to go into companies that are decarbonized, that will shift the investment to places like the EU or places like China, for example, who can invest in decarbonizing with domestic funds. So I was curious to know, and you said this is a challenge that you're trying to solve, because you actually need companies in these markets that can afford to decarbonize to be able to get access to funds to decarbonize. And I was curious to know what your engagement with those clients looks like. Are you able to sort of convince them that we actually need to spend some money here for them to actually be able to decarbonize? And just if you could give some examples of what those conversations look like.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of my clients were actually part of Net Zero Alliance, so they're fully conversant in the topic of climate change, and everybody spiritually is completely aligned with helping heavy emitting sectors abate their carbon footprints. The challenge is when you're a big company, how do you do that at scale? How do you make sure that you're not investing in a company that's got lip service? And there's some real challenges. You know, you have to be practical about thinking about how you monitor your portfolios across multiple different asset managers, multiple sectors. Okay, so it's complex. And some companies just have to resort to the easiest, most basic way of monitoring across the board. But they're always open to engaging. So actually, one of my clients says, if you go and buy a green bond, I'm going to discount the company's carbon by 90%. But I want that green bond to have use of proceeds. I want them to be able to prove that that money that is raised is going into green projects. So you can start to build some innovative things around convincing people that they should change the way they look at carbon. And, you know, there are challenges around carbon anyway. Most of my clients are scope 1 and 2. And then the blanket scope 3 is let's just get rid of fossil fuels. Okay, so then there's our problem actually with the transition is I haven't seen any fossil fuel company yet come out with technology that will shift the needle soon enough to, for me to be confident that I can convince a client that they are actually reducing carbon. And if you take a company in Colombia, for example, Ecopetrol, it's a state-owned oil and gas company, their reserve life is 8 years. Now, they can't transition their company within 8 years, so they still have to buy and develop new reserves in order to deliver enough money to then reinvest. So it's a really complex topic where you have to say, okay, well, what is your commitment? So are companies SBTI aligned? Are they actually talking the talk? Can you see them deploying capital? You know, it's one thing to look at a company that's making a token gesture. What you need to ask the question, if they invest this money today, what is the impact in 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, etc.? And then you look at, you know, if you're thinking about the just transition, are the country's targets aggressive enough? So India looks really unattractive from a 2070 perspective, but actually most of the industrialists, and they did actually say this on Friday, actually believe that they'll smash through those targets because once you get that momentum going, so it's about, is your next incremental idea, don't think that it has to just be a brand new idea. It could be an incremental idea that's really going to shift the needle on helping, you know, how far we've come already. So you have to think about that scalability and that catalytic conversion of your idea.
Thanks so much. That was very insightful.
Perfect. Well, if there are no other questions, I think we can go ahead and wrap this up today. Thank you again for all being so flexible with the technical difficulties. And a huge thank you to all of our sponsors who presented today. It was great to hear from you guys. And yes, we will plan to share the recording. So thank you guys for attending.
Good luck, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thanks, everyone.